Tonight we are on verse 36 of Daniel chapter 11. We are almost done with the book of Daniel. We said once we are done with the book of Daniel, we're going to study the kingdom of darkness. What is demons? What is these things that we always fight and pray against? Who are they? What does the kingdom of darkness look like? And how should we stand as believers against this kingdom of darkness? So after the book of Daniel, we are going to be studying this. We ended on verse 35. Some of those wise leaders will be killed, but as a result of this, the people will be purified. This will continue until the end comes, the time that God has set. The king of Syria will do as he pleases. He will boast that he is greater. That's verse 36 today. He will boast that he is greater than any god, superior even to the supreme God. He will be able to do this until the time when God punishes him. God will do exactly what he has planned. So now we are still on verse 11, but we are almost done with verse 11. And today we are looking at Daniel chapter 11, but from verse 36. So I'll say it's part one of what we're going to be talking about today. We are going to be looking at the future Antichrist, from Persia to Christ, and then the future Antichrist. That's what we are looking at today, from Persia to Christ 3. But we are on part one of the future Antichrist. So as we learn this prophecy, we must know that it does not concern itself with history as such, but only with history as it affects Israel and the Holy Land. So there's a gap between Daniel 11:35 and what follows beginning from verse 36, where the future Antichrist comes into view as the willful king. So a lot would have happened in the gap. This include number one, the first coming and crucifixion of the Messiah, Jesus Christ, the Prince of Daniel, which is Daniel chapter 9, verse 26. Secondly, the presence on earth of a mysterious body of believers called the church and its mysterious exit from the earth. That is called what? Can someone tell me? What is it called? The mysterious exit of believers from this
Rapture.
earth. Rapture, you're right. It is called rapture. That's the mysterious exit. So both the church and its rapture are not in view of the book of Daniel or in the other Old Testament book. Number three, in the political arena, in the political realm, the war of Gog and Magog against Israel would have occurred. That war would see the vanquishing of Russia and her allies. So the United States would have lost its superpower status, possibly, right, because of external attacks against it, and this will occur earlier than the defeat of Russia. So the fall of both the United States and Russia would have created a power vacuum that a new empire of the 10, remember the 10 nation confederacy shall fill. So this is the 10 nation confederacy whose formation will precede the advent of the Antichrist. So from Daniel 11:36 forward, we meet the future Antichrist and his activities. I just read verse 36. So from there to the end of the book, the Antichrist is in focus. He is the king. He is not a new character on the scene, right? So he does not need me to introduce him again. He is not brought as the scene as a king, but as the king. So he has been pointed out several times previously. He is the king of the north and the little horn of Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 8. He is presented as the willful king. So the Antichrist, therefore, will come from Syria. That is the Syrian division of the Grecian Empire. So this Syrian division of the Grecian Empire included the countries of Syria, Babylon, Iraq, Persia, which is now Iran. from any of these countries, Antichrist will emerge. So Antichrist's exaltation and his blasphemies against the God of heaven are mentioned in many scriptures, including Daniel 7, verse 25, Daniel 8, verse 25, 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 4, Revelations 13, verse 5 to 6. So Antichrist shall prosper till the indignation, that is, till the anger of God toward Israel and the outpouring of the wrath onto the earth is demonstrated in the seals, trumpets, and bowls of the book of Revelation. So the indignation is the time of trouble. Daniel chapter 12, we'll see that in Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, and we read it in the past, Matthew 24, verse 21. That is the last 3.5 years of the tribulation period, which is also called the Great Tribulation. So Matthew 24, verse 21 to 22, Revelation 7, verse 13 to 14. It also now goes on to Daniel 11, 37, which says, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers. Let me read in another version that says, the king will ignore the God his ancestors served and also the God that women love. In fact, he will ignore every God because he will think he is greater than any of them. So he will magnify himself above all. So the Syrian Antichrist is further exposed here. He shall not regard the God of his fathers. This can be interpreted to mean that the Antichrist shall be Jewish, since the expression, the God of his fathers, is a reference to the God of the patriarchs or fathers, which is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? Exodus 3:15. So in order to present himself to the Jews in an acceptable manner as their benefactor and Messiah, it is only reasonable to assume that he should be a Jew. So the Jews would hardly be deceived by a Gentile Messiah. So to a blinded Israel, the Antichrist shall be accepted by them as their Messiah. But John 5, verse 43, it says, I am come in my Father's name, and you receive me not. If not, shall come in his own name, him he will receive. I want someone to open for me John 5, verse 43, maybe in King James NIV version. John 5, verse 43, if you got it. So in this verse, he's showing no regard for the God. Did someone find it? No regard for the God of his fathers. That means that this king will have no respect for his religious heritage. He will set aside all organized religion, nor will he regard any God. He will exalt himself as the sole object of worship. Who is on John 5?
Version, Pastor.
Quiet.
No, which version do you want?
NIV.
NIV. Okay. It says, John 5, verse 43. I have come in my Father's name, and you do not accept me. But if someone else comes in his own name, you will accept them.
Exactly there. Jesus speaking to people. So instead of depending on God, you would depend this Antichrist on his power, which you would have received from Satan. Revelation 13, verse 2. By that power, you would demand worship of himself. That Antichrist will be an apostate Jew who will arise from the Syrian division of the Grecian Empire. Is buttressed by the following facts. Number one, firstly, the expression that says the God of his fathers in Daniel 11:37 is an Old Testament term for the God of the patriarchs. I say that. That was seen in Exodus 3:6, verse 15, verse 16, and Exodus 4, verse 5. So Antichrist shall not regard the God of his fathers. So what is going to happen here is that since the Antichrist is seen coming from the Syrian division of the old Grecian Empire, you either come from either from Syria which is Assyria, North Iraq, okay? Or he's gonna come from Babylon, which is south of Iraq. Or he's gonna come from Persia, which is Iran today. So secondly, Antichrist will confirm a covenant with Israel. If you remember when we were reading the book of Revelation, remember? And I was telling you how the Antichrist is going to come and have a covenant with Israel just for a short time. And then he will reveal who he really is in the near future. So he will confirm a covenant with them, with many for 1/7, which is in the middle of the 7. You will put an end to the sacrifice, and you will offer a sacrifice offering. When the Bible talks of 1/7, it's talking of 7 years. And on a wing of the temple, you will set up an abomination. Remember Daniel 9 verse 27, and says he was going to set up an abomination that will cause desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. So Daniel, as we have already established, that he of Daniel 9:27 is the prince that shall come, right? Of verse 26. That is the little horn. The little horn is the Antichrist. So he will confirm a covenant with Israel, and that act will start the countdown. We have seen this in Revelation when we're studying the book of Revelation. We see a countdown of the last 7 years that end with the second advent of Jesus Christ. So for 3.5 years, guys, don't forget, after signing the covenant with Israel, you make an about 10. Remember, I talked about this in the book of Revelation. Now you see it in Daniel. You will now do an about 10, and you put an end to sacrifice and offering. So this tells us that at the time that this ban is enforced, the Jewish temple would have been erected and functional. For only in the temple will sacrifices and offerings be offered. So it is on a wing of the temple that Antichrist will set up an abomination of desolation. Now, you need to understand that Orthodox Jews will absolutely not permit anyone but a man they believe to be the Messiah to build the temple, remember. So 3 times a day, Orthodox Jews pray, saying, "May it be thy will that the temple be speedily built in our days." 3 times a day, they pray that prayer. So they believe that Messiah will come and show them way and how to build. So the firm belief of Orthodox Jews that Messiah will build his temple in Israel is anchored on the following Old Testament scripture in Zechariah 6. Somebody find me Zechariah 6 and read verse 12 and 13. Zechariah chapter 6, verse 12 and 13. Anyone, please find it. Someone find 1 Corinthians 17, verse 11 to 14. 1 Chronicles 17, verse 11 to 14. Who is ready with Zechariah? Zechariah and Chronicles. Anyone ready to read?
So is it Zechariah 6, verse 12?
Yes, and 13. Yes.
This is the NIV version. It says, tell him this is what the Lord Almighty says. Here is the man whose name is the branch, and he will branch out from his place and build the temple of the Lord. It is he who will build the temple of the Lord, and he will be clothed with majesty and will sit and rule on his throne. And he will be a priest on his throne. And there will be harmony between the two.
Let's hear 1 Chronicles 17, verse 11 to 14. 1 Chronicles chapter 17, verse 11 to 14. Who's going to read? Let's all participate. Anyone can read. Cecilis, you can read. Cici, Annette, you can read. Theo, you can read. Nash. Okay, go ahead, Piola.
1 Chronicles 17, verse 11 to 14, and I will read. It says, when your days are over and you go to be with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, one of your own sons, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for me, and I will establish his throne forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. I will never take my love away from him, as I took it away from your predecessors. I will set him over my house and my kingdom forever. His throne will be established forever.
All right. So, can you find someone? Ezekiel 37, verse 26 to 28. Ezekiel 37, 26 to 28. Ezekiel 37, verses 26. Ezekiel chapter 37.
Ezekiel 37, verse
26 to 28.
Verse 26, I will make a covenant of peace with them. It will be an everlasting covenant. I will establish them and increase their numbers, and I will put my sanctuary among them. Verse 27, my dwelling place will be with them. I will be their God, and they will be my people. 28, then the nations will know that I, the Lord, make Israel holy, when my sanctuary is among them forever.
So because of this, thank you. So because of these Old Testament scriptures, Orthodox Jews believe that when Messiah comes, he will build the temple of Israel. Thus, for the Antichrist to enter into a covenant with Israel. So a covenant which will facilitate the building of the Jewish temple. So the Jews would have been deceived. Remember in Revelation we saw this. So the Jews would have been deceived into thinking that their Messiah is come. So a passage in Ezra seems to reinforce the view that Gentiles will have no part in the erection of the temple. I think let's look at Ezra chapter 4, verse 1 to 3. Ezra chapter 4, verse 1 to 3. We will see there that the Jews has no part to this. Ezra, are you ready? Go ahead. Ezra 4, verse 1 to 3. Who is ready to read?
Ezra 4, verse 1 to 3.
Right.
Starting with verse 1, it says, when the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the exiles were building a temple for the Lord, the God of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel and to the heads of the families and said, let us help you build, because like you, we seek your God and have been sacrificing to him since the time of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here. But Zerubbabel, Joshua, and the rest of the heads of the families of Israel answered, you have no part with us in the building in building a temple to our God. We alone will build it to the Lord and the God of Israel, as King Sarah.
Pseudographia. Okay, so the spelling is P-S-E-U-D-E-P-I-G-R-A-P-H-A. Volume 1. Who wants to pronounce that for me? Who wants to try? Cecily, is it right?
Pseudepigrapha.
Pseudepigrapha. Okay. So the Old Testament is called Pseudepigrapha, Volume 1, under the heading, The Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, right? The Testament of the 12 Patriarchs. There's a subheading called the Testament of Dan, under which the following words are actually written that says, for I know that in the last days you will defect from the Lord. You will be offended at Levi and revolt against Judah, but you will not prevail over them. So an angel of the Lord guides them both, because by them Israel shall stand. To me, it sounds like, I don't know about you guys, but for me, it sounds like the blessing of the 12 children of Jacob, right? Dan, this is a blessing that was given to Dan. So this is
Yeah.
that's why they call it, I think, from Dan. It sounds like that. So an angel of the Lord guides them, both because by them Israel shall stand. It says you are motivated to all wickedness by the spirit of deceit among you. For I read that your prince is Satan. So the Old Testament pseudepigrapha is a part of Jewish literature written in the 2nd century BC, and it is preserved through the Christian churches. So the Encyclopedia Judaica, volume 3, on page 62, it also mentions the same details and more concerning this 2nd century document. So this is something you can go through if you want to study more about it. And then fourthly, there are 2 passages of scripture which seem to indicate that Antichrist will come from the tribe of Dan again. So these seem to be a theory that may work. So the first is Genesis 49, verses 16 to 18. Yeah, there we go. We got it. There we go. Which records Jacob's final words to his son Dan. We just said that's Genesis 49, verses 16 to 18. Who wants to read that? Genesis 49. Someone find Judges 15:20, and then someone find Judges 16:31. Piola, who is on 49? Who is on 49? Okay.
I am.
Tolowana? Okay, Cecilia
Genesis,
is then
Genesis,
Tolowana quickly get Judges 15:20, then another one get Judges 16:31. Okay, let's hear Genesis 49.
Genesis 49, verse 16 to 18. Dan will provide justice for his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan will be a snake by the roadside, a viper along the path that bites the horse's heels so that its rider tumbles backward. I look for your deliverance, Lord. That's verse 18.
Wow. Let's hear Judges 15:20.
Judges 15:20 says, Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines.
And then 16:31, Judges 16:31.
Then his brethren and all the house of his father came down and took him. He brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol, in the burying place of Manoah, his father. And he judged Israel 20 years.
Okay. All right. So the first part of Jacob's prophecy was fulfilled when a Danite, Samson was a Danite. He judged Israel for 20 years. Samson, the son of Manoah. But the second part of the prophecy is yet to be fulfilled when the serpent figure is to arise from the tribe of Dan. So this serpent figure is the future Antichrist. So the second scripture is Deuteronomy 33, verse 22, which records the final words of Moses to the tribe of Dan. Who wants to read Deuteronomy 3:22? Maybe I can just read them very quickly. It says, and of Dan, he said, Dan is a lion swamp. Ye shall leap from Bashan. So when Joshua and the Israelites conquered Canaan, the land was divided by lots of the 12 tribes of Israel in Joshua 18. So the tribe of Dan possessed the territory between the land of Philistia in the south, Judah in the east, and Ephraim in the north. So in the west, their border was the Mediterranean coast, but this land allocated them was too little for them, and so the Danites went further north and possessed another territory called north of Lake Huleh. So the territory was formerly called Laish and Leshem. So they renamed it in Joshua chapter 19, can somebody find Joshua 19, verse 40 to 48? Joshua 19, verse 40 to 48. This new territory of Dan was part of the district of Bashan, which was famous for its many fierce lions. So today the district of Bashan belongs to Syria. So the Golan Heights captured by the Israeli people from Syria in the Six-Day War of June 1967 were a part of Bashan. So we hear, who is ready to read the scripture? Anyone ready to read Joshua 19:40?
Joshua 19,
Yes.
verse 40.
Yes,
Oh,
40
go
to
ahead, go
48.
ahead.
The seventh lot came out for the tribe of Dan according to its clans. The territory of their inheritance included Zorah, Eshtaol, Irishemesh, Shalabin, Al-Jadon, Itla, Elon, Timnah, Ekron, Elteke, Gibbethon, Balath, Jehud, Ben, Berak, Gath, Rimmon, Mekchagon, Rakon, with the area facing Joppa. When the territory of the Danites was lost to them, they went up and attacked Leshem, took it, put it to the sword, and occupied it. They settled in Leshem and named it Dan after their ancestors. These towns and their villages were the inheritance of the tribe of Dan according to its clans.
Right. So in the process of Moses, Dan is described as a lion's whelp or cub that shall leap from Bashan. A lion sometimes symbolizes the majesty of kingship. We see this in Genesis 49, verses 9 to 10, or Revelation 5, if you remember verse 5. So the lion's cub also symbolizes the prince. So Dan as a lion's whelp or prince will come out of Bashan or Syria, right? So that's something to take away today. And then fifthly, the future Antichrist is also called the son of perdition. I think I've said this over and over again. Now you know what I'm talking about. 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3 to 4. So the same title is given to the Jews. Judas Iscariot, John 17, verse 12. The term son shows an ancestry from Father Abraham. Luke 16, verse 23 to 25. So the facts we have looked at are summarized this way. One, Antichrist, being a Danite, will be a Jew. Now we're getting clarity from what we were guessing. Remember, when I was telling you in the book of Revelation, when we were starting to say we'll get clarity in the book of Daniel. So this is the clarification we are now getting from the book of Daniel. So the Antichrist will come from the country north of Palestine and will be the king of the north, that is Syria. Now you understand why I was giving you that he cannot be from Europe, he cannot be from America, and he cannot be from China. Neither can he be from Africa. So we can say he's not from Africa, but from the Middle East, sorry. So the Antichrist will also, number 3, he will also be the serpent figure of Genesis 49, 16, and 18 that we read, who will be a Danite. From a Dan, a king shall leap from the hills of Bashan in Syria. So the Antichrist shall be Jewish in ancestry, as he will disregard the God of his fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Antiochus, remember, Epiphanes, the Antichrist forerunner and type, came from Syria. It's going to come from Syria. So the Antichrist logically must come from Syria, and that's become the perfect antitype of Antiochus Epiphanes. So the future Antichrist is also known as the son of perdition. So the same title will be given to the Jew, Judas Iscariot. That's the verses that I gave you. So neither shall he regard the God of his fathers. That will continue to be heard in many places. So one interpretation is that he will not regard the desire of Jewish women. That is their hope to become the mother of the Messiah. To the Jews, Messiah is not yet come at this point in time. So they are looking for him today, and they'll be looking for him when Antichrist comes. So the second interpretation is that he does not possess the natural desire of the companionship of women. A third interpretation is that he will have no mercy on women as well as on men, during the Great Tribulation. Matthew 24, verses 19 to 21. Number 4, the interpretation is that he has a homosexual orientation. He has a homosexual orientation. Number 5, interpretation says he will reject the gods that women desire. But what can only be the most satisfactory interpretation is that the desire of women is something that the women possesses, which is desirable. That thing is love, right? So the desire of women denotes not that which women desire, but that which women possess, which is desirable. It is a possession or precious treasure of women. The desirable possession of women is without doubt love. So that is the love so naturally evident in women. So Antichrist shall be void of any affection of love. So in addition to women's unique possession of love, women by nature generally possesses a deeper degree of sentiments of kindness and compassion, and their pleadings and tears can be unmatched even by the most tender of men. Now, even though Antichrist is confronted with such pleadings and tears, he will remain unmoved and unfazed in his display of cruelty. So if we go back to verse 37 of Daniel 11, that says, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. So the Syrian Antichrist shall not worship any God. He's going to command people to worship him. Simple and straightforward, right? Revelations 13, verse 3, 4, and 8. What we saw there, it was an interpretation that was coming out from these verses when John was saying, I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, remember, and his deadly wound was healed. Remember, we talked about the wound being healed and why it wouldn't be healed initially and why it will be healed later on. So this is what these scriptures are speaking. But in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world, we will see it being put down at this point in time. So Antichrist shall enter into the future Jewish temple, posing himself as God, not the Lamb. 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 4. Who wants to read for me 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 4? We are going to see it is being described here. It is Antichrist's entrance into the temple that Christ called the abomination of desolation. Can someone find me Matthew 24 verse 15 again? Matthew 24 verse 15. And we has found the 2 Thessalonians 2 4.
He will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God.
Let's hear Matthew. What do you have to say, Matthew 24 15?
Matthew 24:15, and I'll read. When you, I got the KJV, sorry, I got the KJV version, NIV version. 24, it says, for false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect.
So we see the added details are given on the life of the Syrian Antichrist. Verse 37 of Daniel 11 says that he will not regard Jehovah or any other God. Yet verse 38 says he shall honor a God called the gods of forces, whom his fathers knew not. The New King James Version revises the wording to read, but in their place he shall honor a God of fortress, and also the Revised Standard Version, it also says, he shall honor this God whom his fathers knew not, with gold and silver and with precious stones and pleasant things. So the question is, how can Antichrist disregard every other god, yet at the same time honor a god of forces or of fortresses? So although Antichrist will choose not to acknowledge anything that is remotely recognized as a deity among men, because he will consider himself a god, yet he will have a god that he will honor. In this contradiction, is this is this like a contradiction? I'm looking for the word contradiction. Of course, because the scriptures cannot contradict themselves, right? So Antichrist's God shall be an ideology that he will zealously follow, and an ideology with which he shall be obsessed. So this ideology is what is called the God of forces or fortresses. It will be an ideology or a war and conquest. So he shall be preoccupied with war and conquest above all other things. So the ideology shall be a god, because the Antichrist will not only cherish it, but will worship it as one does an idol. So none of his fathers raised such an ideology to position of deity. So it is this God whom his fathers knew not, that he shall honor with gold, silver, and with precious stones and pleasant things. It is this God, a strange God, which is going to acknowledge and increase with glory in his strongest fortresses. So none of his fathers from his parentage worshipped the ideology of war and world conquest. So the Antichrist will probably have a sanctuary dedicated to it. But let us see whether this view is a credible one. Okay, so the first thing we want to point out is that we think some have erred in assuming that a literal God is meant. This is why Bible commentators are at a loss as to the identity of this deity, for they cannot find such a deity in the annals of history. So Reverend Alexander Hislop thinks a literal God is meant here. He writes that, he says, although a God of forces cannot be ascertained from historical records, yet there is an emblast of evidence from the records of antiquity of a goddess of forces or fortifications, which in some instances represented with a turret, crown, or with a fortification. This makes the Reverend's task of unraveling the God of the forces easier. I guess you find that the goddess then find out who her consort was. So preceding, or if we continue from this hypothesis from this bishop, he says that this goddess was called Cybele and Rhea. So he also says she was called Diana. Remember Diana in Ephesus, who was worshipped in ancient Babylon and other nations under various names as Ishtar, Balti, Ashtoreth, Aphrodite, and Venus. So as a human being, she was known as Seramis. Remember Seramis? Yes. The Nimrod, the mother of Nimrod. You remember, guys? Yes. Seramis, the mother of Nimrod, who became later on became the wife to his son. It was Seramis who was deified and was worshipped in many nations as the Queen of Heaven. I've heard Catholics in my country, they sing a song called Hosea Mdenga, meaning the Queen of Heaven. I've sang that song without knowing what the song meant. Hosea Mdenga, Queen of Heaven. Seramis first designed and helped in the first ever fortifications of cities after the flood. So the first city after the flood to be fortified with a war around it was Babylon. Nimrod, the mighty hunter, who is Cush, a black man in the Bible. First black man to do wonders was Nimrod. So Nimrod, Serami's son, who became her husband later on, was also defied. The mother married his son, right? And so the conclusion is that if Seramis was the goddess of fortifications, then Nimrod, her husband, or her son, was the god of fortifications, or the god of forces, whom Antichrist will worship. So Alexander, Bishop Alexander Hislop, you find this in his book that is written, The Two Babylons, or Papa Worship, on page 30. That is where he's talking about this concept. But accepting, all right, okay, let's say just accepting that Nimrod is that god of fortifications, it contradicts now the scripture's statement that the God of fortresses is a God from whom Antichrist fathers knew not. Because Nimrod as a deity has always been known and worshipped throughout history, even as Reverend Hislop himself demonstrates, Antichrist will honor a God whom his fathers knew not. So we have come full circle to the first premises that this is an ideology rather than a literal God. So since such a literal God cannot be found, then the idea in the scripture passage is that an ideology is a God who stands. So the God of forces is a phrase translated from the Hebrew word Mauzim, M-A-A-U-Z-I-M, and should actually read the God of fortresses or fortifications. That is, it's defense and munitions, which is the epitome of war. So Antichrist, the willful king who espouse only war as the means of gaining control of the world. So war will be his means to personal deificate the earth. So he will think war, he will dream war, he will live war, and he will make war. That's the most important thing in his time of reign. So he will expand all his energies in the stocking up of armaments and in honoring up his military capabilities. So war will be religion, and war will be his God. War is going to become a religion. So this is the God of fortresses, the God whom his fathers knew not. His ancestors had not taken war as preeminent, but Antichrist will do. So the God of fortresses is the personification of war. So the thought we see emerging is that Antichrist will regard no other God but only war. So the taking of fortresses, he will make his God and he will worship this God, and above all is the means of his gaining world power. So of this God, war is the object of deification. It might be said that his fathers knew nothing, because no other king in the history of the Old Testament made war his religion. So he is God to whom he offered up in sacrifice all gold and silver, precious stones, where we read in Daniel 11, verse 39. Can someone read that one? Daniel 11, 39.
Psalm 11, verse 39, and I shall read. It says, thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain.
So who are them? Who are them that Antichrist will cause to rule over many? So at the time of Antichrist's ascendance to power, he shall rule together with the 10 kings. Remember the 10 kings or the 10, sorry?
10 confederation kings.
Yes, the 10 nation confederacy. We saw that in Revelation 17, verse 12 to 13, remember. So in those 10 kings of the 10-nation confederacy that Antichrist shall cause to rule over many, because those kings have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the Antichrist. So the 10 kings shall acknowledge him as their supreme leader, and for that acknowledgement, they will be rewarded with power to rule over many. So that's the New Century Bible says he will give much honor to the people who join him, making them rulers in charge of many other people, and he will make them pay him for the land they rule. This is how we must understand the statement that he shall divide the land for gain. He shall be liberal to them, sharing the spoils and riches taken from many sources to those that acknowledge him, and making them subservient to him. So the Amplified Bible puts it as, those who acknowledge him, he shall magnify with glory and honor, and he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for a price. So some people think that this dividing the land could also mean the implementation of the two-state solution for Jews and Palestinians, bringing some measure of peace between the two rival people, and paving way for the rebuilding of the Jewish temple in the East Jerusalem on the Temple Mount, besides the Islamic mosque, which is called the Dome of the Rock. I had an opportunity to visit that place. And let me say to you, when you look at this, you begin to ask yourself a lot of questions. Because the prophetic narrative of the last days and the story of the Antichrist, I must state that in the verses that now concern us, we'll find that we are going to learn of the future defeat of Egypt. This will occur during the time that Antichrist rises to power. So Egypt then is one of the three nations that Antichrist will defeat. This is Africa. We talked about Antichrist in Africa. Remember when we were talking, I told you that the Antichrist is, we are talking of Middle East and we are talking of Africa. So we see this in Daniel 7 verse 20 and verse 24. And the whole chapter, Daniel 11, the conflict of two of the four kingdoms of the Grecian Empire is reminded. It keeps coming up. So the king of the north, Syria, and the king of the south, Egypt. Syria is situated to the immediate north of Israel. Egypt is situated to the immediate south of Israel. So we must remember that directions are in prophecy given in relation to Israel. So let's pick up the prophecy on verse 40. Can someone read for me verse 40? 11 verse 40.
Sorry, I already have it open. I'll read. Verse 40, it says, at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships, and he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through.
Now, guys, we have now arrived at the time called the time of the end. This is Daniel's 70th week, the last 7 years of man's sinful career on earth. This is the 7-year tribulation period. So Daniel's 70th week will commence with the event of the making of a covenant between Antichrist and Israel. So verse 36 and up to 39, they are a summary of the life and activities of the Antichrist. This is why the end of the Antichrist is stated in verse 36 in the words, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. So from verse 40, we have a more detailed outline of the events of the last 7 years preceding the second advent of Christ. So at the time of the end, that is the tribulation period, Egypt, the king of the south, shall mobilize for war and push to the north to fight the king of the north, that is the Antichrist. Why will Egypt initiate? Egypt, that's Africa. Why is Africa going to try and push for war? So Egypt will probably be moved to fight against the Antichrist, because the covenant you confirm with Israel will allow the Jewish state to erect the temple in East Jerusalem. So the strengthening of the covenant between the Antichrist and Israel is linked together with sacrifices and offerings of Daniel 9:27. And these sacrifices and offerings can only be offered in the temple. So the momentous act of Israel's building a temple over the disputed Temple Mount and disputed eastern section of Jerusalem will provoke Africa now, Egypt, to launch an all-out attack against the Antichrist. So the king of the north, and not against Israel. This war will occur during the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. I think you are getting it. I've been telling you Africa is involved in the issue of the Antichrist, the end of the world, and all those things. Africa is in there. So Egypt will not launch its attack against Israel because of two restraining factors. Firstly, Egypt entered into a peace treaty, remember, with Israel, I mentioned this, in 1977, and maintained peace with Israel throughout the era of the reign of President Hosni Mubarak, if you remember. So on 11 February 2011, remember, I have said this again, Hosni Mubarak was forced to step down, if you remember. He gave up power after 18 days of protests by over 1 million Egyptians in what was dubbed the Egyptian Revolution. So President Mubarak had ruled Egypt for 30 years. So the anti-Western Muslim Brotherhood temporarily gained power before the Egyptian military leadership took control of the country. So none of these events jeopardized Egypt's peace treaty with Israel at that point in time. Pressure is now mounting against the military leadership of Egypt to facilitate and give way now to civilian rule by a civilian government. Whether or not the military rule of Egypt will give way to civilian rule, and whether Egypt's peace with Israel will still stand in Egypt's unfolding drama, this remains unseen, brothers and sisters. When you read news and you see this, quickly go to Revelations and the book of Daniel and see where we are. Secondly, the destruction of Gog and Magog and their allies, among them many Islamic as well as anti-Jewish states, in their invasion of Israel, would have destroyed any will by Egypt to fight Israel. But Egypt will move to fight one who was embraced by Israel. So Egypt's military would still be intact because it would not have participated in the battle of Magog and Gog against Israel. You see this in Ezekiel chapter 38 and Ezekiel chapter 39. So the invasion of Gog and Magog against Israel will occur sometime before the 7-year tribulation begins and before the Antichrist rises to world prominence. That's the provision in Antichrist's covenant with Israel that will allow the rebuilding of the Jewish temple over the disputed Temple Mount in East Jerusalem. This will be viewed by Egypt as a declaration of hostilities and the reason why Egypt will strike at the Antichrist. So we must also remember that at the time that Antichrist makes a covenant with Israel, a 10-nation coalition called the Nation Confederacy and the 7th empire of biblical prophecy would have crystallized in the Mediterranean regions. So it is symbolized by the 10 toes of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar saw in a vision, Daniel chapter 2, and the 10 horns, the 4th beast in Daniel's first vision, Daniel 7 verse 7. So the launching of an attack against Antichrist, the king of the north, by Egypt will bring retaliation. So Antichrist will descend upon Egypt with the swiftness and destruction of a whirlwind, and with chariots, armored cars and tankers, and with horsemen. And we will see the navy soldiers involved with many ship. So the statement, he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over, proves Antichrist will have an expansionistic agenda. He wants to expand his rule. So Daniel 11 verse 41, can someone read that one for me? Daniel 11 verse 41. Daniel chapter 11 verse 41.
Verse 41. It
Yes.
says, he shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand: Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon.
So after crushing Egypt and the countries, Antichrist, the king of the north, shall enter into the glorious land, that is Israel. This is the time that he will ban all Jewish sacrifices and offerings into the temple and enter into the temple in Jerusalem, where he shall proclaim himself to be God and demand that he be worshipped. This is the abomination of desolation mentioned in Daniel 9:27. What else is he going to do? I've said this several times. Who wants to highlight? What is he going to do in the temple? Who remembers? What is the Antichrist? That is so... But what is he going to sacrifice? What is he going to do?
He's going to sacrifice the pigs
Yes,
in the temple.
exactly.
Those pigs are
Exactly.
stupid,
He's gonna...
yes.
Yes. So this is the abomination of desolation mentioned in Daniel 9:27, 12, and 11, Matthew 24:15. And at that time, his true colors now, as a phony and an enemy, not a friend of Messiah or Israel. That's when it's going to be exposed. Remember, we talked about it in the book of Revelation. This is when it is now going to be revealed. So when he rises to power and prominence before the middle of the tribulation period, Antichrist will conquer many countries. This is a fact declared in verse 40 and repeated here, confirming Antichrist's agenda of expansion and the desire to rule the world. So among the conquered nations shall be 3 of the 10 kings, which is they are part of the 10 nation confederacy. Daniel 7 verse 8, verse 19, verse 20, and verse 24. So Egypt is specifically mentioned as one of the 10 of the countries defeated by Antichrist. But 3 nations shall escape Antichrist's invasion. And which countries are those? I've mentioned them before when we were studying the book of Revelation. Who remembers the 3 countries?
I just
I'll give what?
Moab is one of them.
Yes.
Well, I think I just read them. Edom,
Yes.
and then that's the last one is that Ammon.
Yes, the chief of the children of Ammon. So today these names are identified as territories of the country of the kingdom of Jordan. So the reason why these 3 places escape the Antichrist is not difficult to guess. It is to these territories of Jordan that the Jews of the tribulation period will escape and be in hiding until the end of tribulation. I gave you the verses last time and the reasons why they will escape. Isaiah 16 verse 1 to 5, Isaiah 26 verse 20 to 21, Isaiah 42 verse 11 to 13, Isaiah 63 verse 1 to 5, Psalm 60, verse 6 to 12, Psalm 108, verse 8 to 13, Ezekiel 20, verse 33 to 34 to 44, Revelations 12, verse 6 and verse 14. So we see this also in Daniel 11, verse 42 to 43. So I'm finishing the book of Daniel 11. So on verse 40, we see that they enter into the countries and they overflow and pass over. Because verse 41 says, many countries shall be overthrown. And then verse 42 says, he shall stretch forth his hand upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. So in defeating Egypt, Antichrist shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, over all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans, that's Africa too, and Ethiopia shall be at his steps. So Antichrist shall control Egypt's economy and historical monuments. By conquering Egypt, the Libyans and Ethiopians, Egypt's allies, shall be in subjugation to the Antichrist and shall serve him. So it appears Egypt will have assumed headship over these African allies by the time the Antichrist rises to prominence. So the role of leadership of African nations, we're talking of African Union, right? AU, African Union or African nations, was, if it had been successful, I think if you were following news in 1969, something like that, I think the African nations agreed that Libya under Colonel Muammar Gaddafi seized the power from King Idris in 1969, if you still remember the history. So during his tenure, Gaddafi sought to bring the Arab world under his leadership in an Arab unity and nationalism with the common objective of destroying the Jewish state of Israel. So when the Arab world lent him little or no support, Gaddafi turned his attention to African states, and there he succeeded in spearheading the formation of the now called African Union, which was established in 2002, which replaced the organization, the OAU Organization of African Unity, that had been formed in May 25, 1963. So the African Union, with its headquarters in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, was formed to promote unity and solidarity of African states, to spur economic development and to promote international cooperation. But the AEU also established a central bank called a Court of Justice, which ironically hasn't seen any African leader tried before it anyway, and an all-African parliament. And it also created the Summary Standby Force, a peacekeeping force of about 15,000 soldiers. I think Zimbabwe has participated at some point in time. So in 2011, Gaddafi was slain in a Western-sponsored Libyan revolt, remember? That ended his 42-year rule, and thereafter, Libya's influence over Africa, boom, it diminished, right? So this may explain Egypt's ascendance to the realm of African states in the end times. So that Egypt will have allies is described by Ezekiel in his prophecy of the end time defeat of Egypt and the allies. This is Ezekiel 30, verses 1 to 9. So as we end, I want to end here, but let me say Egypt's allies shall be Ethiopia, Libya, Lydia, and Chad. So Ethiopia in prophecy refers to a union of African states. Libya still retains its name and location. Lydia here is not the Asian Lydia, but a country south of Egypt and near the Sudan, whose people descended from Ludim, the son of Mizraim. If you know the black people in the Bible, right? Mizraim, Sekurubake is Cush, who was most probably called Lud. Chab is the name of the land inhabited by the Nubians. Who are the Nubians? Yes, we are the Nubians. We are the Nubian queens who inhabited Nubia, which the Arabs named Sudan, that is land of the blacks. So according to the Arabic version of the Bible, the Nubians people are they call them Chab, C-H-U-B. Strabo, the Greek historian and geographer in 64 BC and AD 19, says that the Nubians dwelt on the left of the stream of the Nile and were a large nation in Libya. I don't want to touch Nigeria in those countries. I think I want to just stay around Libya in these countries. But I want you to understand sometimes the word Niger, Negro, where it comes from, and then all this is included in everything. But the Roman author of natural history in AD 23 and 79 says that they were the Nubian Ethiopians who dwelt near the Nile. So from these facts, the land called Chab lay either west of the Nile in Libya or south of Egypt in the region of Sudan. Ezekiel says the sword, if you read the book of Ezekiel, it says the sword shall come upon Egypt and great pain shall be in Ethiopia when the slain shall fall in Egypt, and they shall take away her multitude, and her foundations shall be broken down. Ethiopia and Libya and Lydia and all the mingled people in Chab and the men of the land that is in league shall fall them by the sword. So Antichrist will ravage Egypt and the allies. So in the 19th chapter of this book, Isaiah gives us some added details on what will befall Egypt in the very end of time. I mean, there's Egypt's desolation and deliverance by God, which is outlined in I think in Isaiah 19 verse 1 to 4. So I want to end here today, and we will finish chapter 11. We are almost done. I think we are only left with maybe 3 or 4 verses, but because of time, I don't want to continue because I know some of you will not take this anymore. I want to open this time to you to hear your comments, your questions, anything that you didn't understand today that was so confusing, so that we can revisit before we continue next week.
This is a quick comment, Pastor. So having studied the book of Revelation with you last year, as we are actually doing Daniel now, everything is now making sense. It's like we're marrying a lot of stuff that we did already in the book of Revelation. Even like when we're talking even about the Antichrist is something that we touched upon, even the desolation of the church, of the temple, I mean. So it's like, it's making sense. I'm still fascinated to see how Egypt was gonna rise up to be so powerful. That's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, I remember when I was saying, don't worry, the Antichrist, everybody was saying, oh, maybe the Antichrist will come from Europe. Others were saying, oh, maybe it should be coming from China. Others were saying, oh, the Antichrist must be in America. And I told you, no, it's going to be from Africa, where we will never expect what is going to happen in the Middle East. And here we are today. It is unfolding. That's why I was like, hold on. We're going to get all this from the book of Daniel. So it's exciting to see. If you haven't studied with us the book of Revelations, guys, get every chapter of the book of Revelations from chapter 1 to the end. You can go to the forum, or you can ask Tonde. He can give you all the series, or you can go, I think, on our YouTube page. You should be able to get all the series of the book of Revelation. We started it last year, and we started the book of Daniel last year, and we are almost done now. Any other question, comment, anything? Is it making sense, guys? Is it making sense in any way?
It's really making a lot of sense.
It makes it easier for you to read the Bible, right?
Yeah.
Because you now read with an
This is
understanding.
the first time I'm really hearing about the tribulations, maybe because I was still in denial. Every time I try and sit, I said, no, this is something I don't want to read. But I think now I really have to go through the Bible.
That's why we had to study the book of Revelation because it's one book people don't want to read. They don't want to study. They don't want to talk about it. Everybody postpones it and just say, oh, you know, the book of Revelation is hard to understand. But when you read it, it will be so nice. You will then be able to tell, is COVID-19 vaccine the Antichrist or not? Is it the 66 number? So it will actually help you to discern things that are happening today and see where we are, where we at. So it will help you also to follow the events that are happening on this earth today. So if you get time, please go through the book of Revelation. Just listen to it. You can listen it on podcast. You can listen it on YouTube. I mean, I think the guys have put it in quite a number of forms. And it will be so easy to marry it now with the book of Daniel. Once you study the book of Revelation, it begins to interpret all the things that seem to be strange and foreign in the book of Revelation. They are now being explained now in the book of Daniel, and they begin to make sense. It's like the book of Daniel kind of like put flesh on the book of Revelation. Yeah. Any other comment, question? And one thing that I always say is go back and listen again. Studying these books, you can't listen them like one time and just say, oh, I understand them. It takes that desire to want to really learn to be able to understand this.
Pastor, it's also interesting to learn that, you know, the Antichrist is going to come from the tribe of Dan, and to know that the tribe of Dan is one of the children, you know, of actually even the descendants of Abraham. Not only that, they are also part of the promised people. And so it's like brother fighting against other brothers, because then his whole goal is actually to eradicate, you know, the Jews, which is interesting because I mean they are still the same people.
Yep.
So that's interesting. I guess the whole family dynamics continues, because you know we always hear about family dynamics, and this is still part of that. So from the book of Genesis up to Revelations, it's all about that again. I guess the family dynamics, I guess.
Yeah, that's how when you understand what the Bible, I say the Bible is just about 3 Ks. The king, the kids, and his kingdom. That's all what it is about. It's family. It's a family affair. So when you want to just finalize what the Bible is all about, it's just 3 Ks. 3 Ks. The king, the kids, and family. The king, the kids, and his kingdom. All right, guys, thank you so much for being here tonight. I hope we'll be able to meet again next week, Wednesday, as we try to finish up the book of Daniel and venture into something totally different this year. Truly, do you want to close us with a word of prayer?